Hello, all of my amazing students. I am here doing some problems from 7.1, which is the very start of our factoring. And remember, 7.1 is going to be greatest common factors and factoring by grouping. So here we start with greatest common factors. And when we're pulling out a greatest common factor, we're just looking for the largest factors that or the greatest common factor of each. So 12 and 15 both have a 3, and that's the biggest thing I can pull out of both of them. So I'm going to pull out a 3, and then the p squared and the p have a p in common. So I will pull out the 3p. To find out what belongs in this parenthesis, I will take the 12p squared and divide it by the 3p to get a 4p. I take the sign, I take the 15p divided by the 3p to get a 5. And if I distribute that 3p back through there, I wind up getting back to what I started with. So the next one is also a factoring out of a greatest common factor. And 45 and 5 both have a 5 in common. So I'm going to pull out the 5. And this, remember, w to the fourth is w, 4 w's multiplied together. And this one is only 2 w's multiplied together, so they have a w2, or to the second, in common. And then once I pull out the w squared and the 5, I end up with 45 divided by 5 is 9. W to the fourth divided by w squared is w squared minus, now this one is going to just be a 1. Ooh, okay, now look at that very carefully. That factor, 9w squared minus 1, is one of our special factors, and it can be factored again because it is the difference of two squares. Okay, and we did the difference of two squares when we were doing our multiplication, but now that we're factoring it, the difference of two squares becomes the conjugate. So remember, what we're using is a squared minus b squared is equal to a plus b, a minus b. Do you recognize that pattern? Okay, so that a squared minus b will always factor, and notice that it is the different signs that actually makes the ab and the negative ab cancel each other. So I can further factor this one into 5w squared times 3w plus 1 times 3w minus 1. Okay, so this was actually covered in the 7.3. So on this little homework set, they didn't make you break this one up, but it does break up into more factors. Okay, so the next one is another one that we're going to pull out a greatest common factor. And we have a 4 in common. And we have a T4, T3, T2, so all of them have at least a T2. So then this term divided by this term is 3t squared, and this term divided by this term is going to be a negative, because negative divided by positive is a negative 2t, and then a negative divided by positive is a negative 1. Okay, so we have a monomial times a trinomial after we factor out the greatest common factor. And so now we've got two variables. We've got m's and n's, and we've got 7, 2, and 2. And so 7 and 2 and 2 don't pull out any kind of a numeral value, but m to the 4, m, and m is going to give me m that I can pull out of all of them, and an n squared out of all of them. Okay, and notice that these two are so very close together, but they are not like terms, because one has 3 n's multiplied together and one only has 2 n's multiplied together. So now I'm going to take the first term and divide it by this term to get 7m cubed. And then this one divided by this one is going to give me 2n. And then this one divided by this one is going to give me 2, just a 2. And that would be our factored answer. So now we're beginning the factoring by grouping portion of 7.1, and we have a g minus 2 and a g minus 2. This is what I call kind of a pseudo or rigged problem. In other words, you very rarely will see a problem like this. But what they're trying to do is show you what we're headed towards with factoring by grouping. So they've got a factoring by grouping problem half done for us. And then when we're factoring by grouping, we're basically going to be pulling out a greatest common factor. But can you see that this first batch here has a g minus 2 and the second batch over here has a g minus 2, so that I have a g minus 2 in common. So now I'm going to pull the g minus 2 to the front, and when I divide this whole thing by g minus 2, I end up with a 3h. And when I divide this whole thing by g minus 2, I end up with a plus 7. And that is factored now because I have something times something else. Okay, so now we're going to come back in a minute with more of that factoring by grouping.